So, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Seizing the Moment webinar titled Identifying Opportunities for Collaboration and Collective Action to Address Large-Scale Challenges. This webinar is part of a project titled Seizing the Moment, Exploring Just and Sustainable Pandemic Recovery Through Community Campus Partnerships, which is led by the Community Engagement and Research Center at the University of Regina and Community Campus Engage Canada. And I'll just welcome to everyone present, and I'll just remind everyone to please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. So I'm Magda Gomans, I'm manager at CCEC, and I'm really pleased to be speaking to all of you today from my home office here in Ottawa, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I'll be one of your moderators today. CCEC is building a national network and knowledge sharing community. So essentially, we're building spaces for connection, for conversation, for collaboration, and for capacity building for participants in community campus research and learning partnerships across the country. And our focus is on community-driven partnerships for social impact. And if you'd like to learn more about CCEC, you can visit our website at ccecanada.ca, and there'll be some links added in the chat box for some more information too as we go along through this hour. So I'd like to introduce you now to our other moderator today, Lynn Gidluck. She's one of the co-leads of the Seizing the Moment project, and I'll just pass along to you, Lynn, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, thank you, Magda. My name is Lynn Gidluck, and I'm joining you from Regina, Saskatchewan, where I have the privilege of leading the University of Regina's Community Engagement and Research Center, and it's been a privilege to work with Magda and my colleague, Dr. Amber Fletcher, who teaches in the Sociology department at the University of Regina on this very interesting project. And Amber and I join everybody from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan, where we're all, I think our whole nation is mourning the news that we just learned yesterday, but more details today about the tragedy at Cowessess First Nations. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to a really interesting conversation.
Great, thanks, Lynn. And I was just mentioning before, and I'll just mention again for all of you, to maximize your viewing experience, you can click the view button at the top right and make sure it's on speaker view, and that will give you the best view to our speakers today. So I'll just explain now for a few moments a little bit about the Seizing the Moment project. So it's a year-long initiative that we've been involved in here at CCEC, as I said, in collaboration with the University of Regina, with their Community Engagement Research Center. And it involves a series of outreach activities over the year. And that includes a 2-day workshop that was just held at the end of May. There's a series of post-workshop webinars. And so this event today is the first post-workshop webinar, so we're very excited about that. And we also have an ongoing project webpage, and we're going to post in the chat box a link to that webpage. And it basically provides links to recordings from the workshop and today's event. It provides opportunities for you to contribute with your thoughts about different concepts related to this project. And it provides an opportunity as well to post stories about partnerships and community impacts and community strategies related to moving through and hopefully, as we can see over these months, beyond the pandemic as well. So thinking about transformation in communities, what we've been learning, how we can move beyond this in supportive and strong ways, reflecting on what we've learned in different communities across Canada. So this project is making space for discussions around several questions as we move through and beyond the pandemic. So questions such as, what types of challenges are communities and community-based organizations experiencing or witnessing at this time? How are communities building paths forward? How might pandemic or broader systemic challenges be addressed through research, learning, and creative partnerships among communities and post-secondary institutions? And how can post-secondary institutions learn from and support communities as they move through these strategies moving forward? And so our workshop that I mentioned earlier, the Seizing the Moment workshop, That was held on May 25th and 26th, so it's just a few weeks back. I think Lynn and many of you who probably attended, I see some familiar faces and names who attended that workshop. We had a great response, great participation, and really great feedback. So that was wonderful to see. We had almost 400 people registered to join our discussion about, as I mentioned, pandemic challenges and lessons learned in communities across Canada. That event included a series of regional discussions that took place on day one, as well as throughout the event, opportunities to hear keynote presentations from a variety of speakers. And so we've started to make recordings from the event available. As I mentioned earlier, there is a link on our project webpage to those recordings. And we're going to be adding recordings from the regional discussions to that space pretty soon as well. And so with this event today, with this webinar, we're aiming to continue the conversation. And so the framing questions for today's webinar, which are basically based on some of the feedback we received from the workshop, and then thinking about some of these overarching goals of this project in general. Those questions are, how are we collaborating to address current challenges? Are new ways of exchanging skills or delivering services across organizations and institutions emerging? And how or how might we respond to current challenges through collective action and advocacy? So those are the general framing questions we have for today, but we're aiming for a rather informal space during this hour. And so we encourage you later on in the discussion portion of this event to let us know what you're thinking and what you might want to share, or if you have particular questions as well. So as part of this discussion, we're so happy to welcome our three presenters here today, and they're contributing their experiences to this discussion. We're welcoming Aliya Hirji, social and climate justice activist, Scott Leon, researcher at the Wellesley Institute, and Jean-Marc Fontan, professor in sociology at the Universite du Quebec at Montreal. So very happy to have them with us. Following their presentations, we're going to open up some space here today for discussion. And so you're welcome to, during that space, as I said, we're aiming for somewhat of an informal space. So you're welcome to ask questions of the presenters. You're welcome to voice thoughts about this theme, or perhaps we can have a conversation across this group of people around opportunities for collaboration and collective action. So we'll just, Lynn and I will moderate that portion and just see how things go. So I'll just run through a few Zoom items too before we get started. Please remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking, and unmute if you'd like to speak. You may wish to turn off your camera, but you're not required to if you're not speaking. And then once the presentation portion of the webinar is complete, if you do have a question for presenters or a comment you'd like to share, you can add them into the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hand as well, and Lynn and I will make sure that you're heard. And that's about it for some of those Zoom details. So I'm now happy to introduce you to our first presenter today. So Aliya Hirji is a social and climate justice activist who organizes global strikes, pushes for governmental action, and works on divestment campaigns across Canada. He pushes for pension plans, banks, and universities to divest from climate failure and invest in our collective present and future. So I'm very happy to welcome you, Aliya, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, as it was just said, I'm a high school student as well in so-called Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Mississaugas of the New Credit. The youth climate strike movement has been on the forefront of societal climate action for years now. Teenagers and young adults have taken space by creating political and social movement that allows us to make change before we're even at the age of voting. I've spent the last year organizing global climate strikes, online actions because of the pandemic, and a lot of divestment campaigns, which is a little newer to me, and it's not common for a lot of adults to hear divestment come out of a young person's mouth. The point of the youth climate strike movement is to turn away from preaching recycling and picking up trash and turn towards holding governments, institutions, and world leaders accountable for the change we need.
Obviously, the sense now is global connection. The place of the
Sorry about that. This is collective climate action. Something I really heavily emphasize in our work is making sure that we are working towards collective action, because it's going to take all of us to fight this crisis. I'm going to speak about the 3 main divestment campaigns I work on within the Canadian climate strike movement, and how necessary it is for youth and adult partnerships in protecting our collective future and present. Just to go over it in case you don't know, in short, divestment is the opposite of investment. It's a reduction of some form of assets for financial, ethical, or political motive. Divesting from fossil fuels is imperative to protecting our planet. It's essential to protect marginalized communities, especially Indigenous peoples, whose rights are often violated for fossil fuel projects. And it's a smart financial decision, as fossil fuel investments continue to perform worse and worse. As a high school student in Ontario, I also coordinate a divestment campaign here, pushing for the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan to divest from fossil fuels. The campaign is made up of a few students, high school students, and some high school teachers who have united in pushing for the Teachers' Pension Plan to stop investing in fossil fuel products, plastic companies, privatization of water, and to make sure that teachers' retirement savings are being used to protect their students' futures instead of directly fighting against our efforts to push for climate change. This campaign has been really cool. It's one of the first divestment campaigns I worked on where there's a really strong partnership between young people and adults, and you can definitely feel that, especially because it's teachers working with students, and I think teachers and students, professors and students have a really special connection where we learn about our future from you, and so we really want you to also protect that, because if you don't protect our future, what really do we have left? And it's been really great to work with adults whose money is affected and students whose future is affected. And it's really amazing to be heard by so many teachers, and to have youth voices amplified by our teachers. And talking about this in school and just in class is so fun for so many of us, because there's just so much support with teachers and professors fighting for climate action. Another big part of the youth divestment movement is divestment groups at different universities. You may or may not have heard of the Divest Canada Coalition. It's a collection of different divestment groups all across the universities who are pushing for their universities to divest from fossil fuels and start investing in climate action and invest in a better future, so more ethically. While a lot of this is pushed by young people, big wins such as the University of Waterloo's new carbon neutral investment plan, it isn't all possible just run by young people. The support of alumni and professors and administration at universities is really what helps push these big changes. And that, again, that relationship is really special. Your professors being really supportive of you, and obviously being knowledgeable that what they're teaching, what future they're teaching, also needs to be protected. We've seen a lot of divestments recently in the past few years, a lot of carbon neutral plans, a lot of net zero plans, but even though these are declared, we still have to make sure that universities and pension plans are still held to those promises, keeping that pressure on, and that helps to come from both students, young people, and adults, and teachers and professors. A third divestment movement, which was really complicated for me to learn about at first, is pushing for the big 5 Canadian banks to stop investing in fossil fuels. So the big 5 Canadian banks, which most of you probably bank at, which is CIBC, TD, BMO, Scotiabank, and RBC, together, since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, have invested over $700 billion in fossil fuels, and they do that by using your money to invest in climate failure and colonial violence against Indigenous people. And so while our organization is very youth-oriented, it's called Banking on a Better Future, we aim to educate and empower young people to take control of their own finances and make sure that their banks aren't investing them in climate failure. We also work with a lot of adult organizations who are pushing for the same cause. And these partnerships help us hold webinars and in-person actions and connect with people all across so-called Canada. And it's really great to be able to focus just on young people, because often young people are left out of the discussion of finances and investments, but also be able to work with adults who have a lot more invested, a lot more of their money in their banks just because of cumulative wealth. And so just working on these 3 campaigns has really showed me how important it is to partner outside of the youth climate movement, and how excited adults are to really help push for our cause. So while I'm not a university student yet, I still have 1 more year. I really understand the importance, and I can see the importance and the impact that happens between partnering with young people and collective action that universities, institutions, organizations can all take together.
Wonderful, thanks, Aliya. That was great to hear about your efforts related to climate change and youth action and collaborative action and advocacy. So our next presenter is Scott Leon. Scott Leon is a researcher at the Wellesley Institute, which is a research and policy nonprofit in Toronto. Scott studies problems related to housing affordability and creative policy solutions to housing challenges. Scott has been researching homelessness and solutions to homelessness for over half a decade. And currently, Scott is also leading a slate of Wellesley Institute research projects examining residential evictions of people who rent their homes in the city of Toronto. So welcome, Scott, and I look forward to hearing your presentation today.
Thanks for that introduction, Magda, and thanks, Aliya, for that awesome presentation. I'm going to try sharing my screen here. Hopefully this works. Can people see this? And how about that? Is that working? Excellent. And I'll start a timer to make sure I don't go too far over. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today, Magda. My name is Scott Leon, and I'm a researcher at the Wellesley Institute in Toronto. Today, I'll be talking a little bit about our approach to engaging with community, as well as a recent piece I wrote around ending homelessness through collective action. As Magda mentioned, Wellesley Institute is a independent research and policy nonprofit, and our mandate is to improve health and health equity in the Greater Toronto Area through research and policy action on the social determinants of health. So we often think about what helps people be healthy and stay healthy. People often think about medical care, health insurance, but the largest factors that keep people healthy are social, environmental, and economic. Having a decent home to live in, having a decent income, access to healthy food, etc. Our approach tries to or incorporates 3 pieces in every research project, including research, communications, and policy, including government relations. Personally, I'm a mixed methods researcher incorporating quantitative and qualitative research methods, and I focus primarily on housing and homelessness. We at Wellesley approach research always with an eye to policy change and change on the ground. We don't do any research for research's own sake, even though it might be very interesting. Try to be as pragmatic as possible, using data and resources that are available, as opposed to waiting for the ideal data sets. We work with partners, including community organizations, advocacy organizations, government, academics, and others. Try to focus on what we think pragmatically current governments would be willing to change in terms of policy. And we try to work through different angles, including inside tracks, working with politicians and bureaucrats, as well as outside tracks, working with community-based organizations and advocacy coalitions. Our approach to working with community really focuses on first on listening to community, working in collaboration with community-based organizations, focusing our research on research questions that the community is asking, and really with an aim to provide research and information that community-based organizations can use to press for policy change, kind of creating the ammunition for policy change. We participate in a number of community-led tables and coalitions, and we engage in a long-term manner and try to engage with respect. A number of researchers, unfortunately, tend to kind of parachute into communities, work with communities in more of an extractive manner, publish their research behind paywalls, and not follow through with long-term connections and policy change. And we really try to break that pattern. And I know a number of people on this call today are really guided by that mission as well, including Lynn. And the work doesn't end when our research is published. So the goal is really change on the ground and policy change. I'm going to talk through quickly a piece I had just written and released in April, looking at a new normal for ending homelessness and collective action towards adequate support. This is on the Wellesley Institute website if you're interested in taking a look. It's not too hard to find. So the idea behind this new normal series is really kind of flows into what Magda has been talking about and Seizing the Moment has been talking about, that the pandemic provides an opportunity to reconsider the normal state of affairs and learn from its failures and envision a bold new normal. This is part of a wider series that the Wellesley Institute is undertaking. Other topics include childcare and the wealth tax. So the old normal was around homelessness was really a failure. We've got, depending on how you measure it, 150,000 to 300,000 Canadians experiencing homelessness each year. In Toronto, 10,000 people homeless on any given night, including upwards of 500 sleeping rough on the streets or in encampments. We've seen the wait list for social housing and supportive housing in Toronto skyrocket. For supportive housing, so long-term affordable housing that includes supports for people living with addictions and mental health challenges, as well as other challenges. We've seen this waitlist grow from 700 in 2009 to over 18,000 now. And without significant public investment, this is projected to rise to over 37,000. The old normal was one of systemic disparities that were largely unaddressed. Historic and ongoing structural racism has led to Black and Indigenous Torontonians in particular being overrepresented in the homeless population. Homelessness, we know, has large negative impacts on individuals' health and well-being, and this plays out at a population level. People experiencing homelessness are much more likely to die prematurely and suffer from a range of health problems. Put simply, stable housing is a basic requirement for health, and homelessness erodes health at a population level. Many more people in Toronto and across Canada live at a high risk of homelessness, largely due to poverty and housing instability. The mass homelessness of this old normal was driven by policy choices and inaction, including reductions in social housing, underinvestment in social housing, social benefit cuts in the 90s that we've still not recovered from, and deteriorating quality of jobs. So the pandemic has highlighted many of these failures and inequities in our society, and it's made this crisis really unignorable, especially in Toronto. You can see with the actions around encampments and evictions of people living in encampments in Toronto parks. And the pandemic and recession are likely to lead to increasing homelessness over the next 5 years, and it might take up to 5 years for a lot of these lagged effects to be felt. We also know that residential evictions are a primary contributor to homelessness, and enforcement in Ontario has begun again. So what do we mean by ending homelessness? Generally, it's taken to mean functional zero. So this means that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. It allows us to build on our successes, including large-scale studies that show that housing first approaches are effective, and an opportunity to reimagine how our society builds and distributes housing more broadly. I've got 4 things that I want to touch on here. The first is addressing homelessness. Primary way to end homelessness for those without a home is to provide housing. And this housing first approach has been studied rigorously and well supported by the evidence. Prevent, so moving upstream to address the underlying causes before homelessness starts. Brief aside, I just wanted to talk about the Supportive Housing Growth Plan, which is a coalition of a number of service providers and activist organizations across Toronto pushing for the expansion of supportive housing in the city of Toronto. I'm a little bit over, so I won't go any more into that, but if you Google Supportive Housing Growth Plan, you can see our work there. We need to focus so there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We need substantive direction provided by people experiencing homelessness themselves and targeted approaches. And really, I think the last one is it comes down to funding this. Ending homelessness will require a plan to commit resources and follow through over time. And ending homelessness will require an all-hands-on-deck approach that we've collectively failed to deliver up until now. And now we see it's a time to change that. And as the name of the event suggests, seize the moment. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Scott. And I was really interested in some of those points you were raising on the slide. So in our discussion section, I'd love to ask you some questions about that further as well. So thanks so much. So now I'm pleased to introduce our third presenter today. Jean-Marc Fontan is a professor in the Department of Sociologie at the Universite du Quebec at Montreal. He's specialized in the field of economic sociology, and his research is related to social economy, collective actions in regard to poverty, socio-territorial revitalization, philanthropy, social innovation, and partnership research. He is a member of the Centre de Recherche sur les Innovations Sociales. He directs the Social Innovation Collection at the Presse de l'Université de Québec and directs, with Peter Elson, the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy Research on Canadian grant making, the lab. So welcome, Jean-Marc, and we look forward to hearing about your activities today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Magda, and thanks, Lynn, for the invitation. So I was asked to try to see how the collaboration experience in Quebec could be interesting to maybe help answering the question we were asked about. So about the collaboration, its capacity to develop collective action, and also to address large-scale challenges. If we look at the Quebec history, we see that from 1840 to 1960, there was a main organization that was leading all the community action. It was the Catholic Church. So everything was quite simple because there was a kind of umbrella, a common ideology, and a kind of a bus to direct the action. When the Quiet Revolution happened in Quebec, so at the beginning of 1960, things changed. The leadership from the church disappeared, and a new leadership emerged out of organization from civil society, popular organization, and community organization. And they had to organize not with church, but with the states. Even it was also a kind of division between the provincial and the federal states. In the 70s, those organizations start to be more professional. And in the 80s and 90s, they start to have strong collaboration between them, and lots of, we can say, sectoral networks appear in the 80s and in the 90s. An example of a big network that emerged in the 19 was the social economy movement around the Chantier de l'économie sociale that connected almost all the organization and social movement that were doing action on the economical ground on the province of Quebec. So we had a long history of collaboration, and what we can look at the collaboration that was developed in Quebec, there were around maybe 3 models. The first one is, we can say, representative models. It's to have organization of the same sector to be together, to have a kind of umbrella organization that will be in relation with the state. That's the first model, very interesting, but it brings a kind of construction of the community action in silos. Then we saw other kind of collaboration around exchange of information. And one very interesting example about that is the construction that was elaborated by a kind of collaboration between Centraide du Grand Montréal, so it's United Way Montreal, and the regional public health agencies in Montreal, and also the social development of the city of Montreal. The 2 organizations together, they put resources to be able to help community organization at the level of community sector, of large wards, and to develop a table of consultation. So now we have 30 tables of consultation in Montreal, and they put together people from the, of course, community sector, but also the institutional sector. And the third level is collaboration around project. And one very interesting example is a new collaboration that we saw in Montreal happen between 8 grant-making foundations to help support with money the action that is done, action plan that are developed at the consultation level of Table de Concertation de Montréal. So those 3 type of models are interesting, but they illustrate also the limits of the collaboration. Limits because we mainly collaborate to exchange ideas, to have a conversation between us, to sometimes exchange resources, mainly money or sometimes people. But we are not in a very aggressive kind of collaboration that will go beyond the identity of each sector, of each organization. And I think we will need to have a more elaborate kind of collaboration, more engaged kind of collaboration, maybe more politically engaged kind of collaboration to be able to really challenge the current issues that we have, especially around social justice and environmental justice. So around the question, is collaboration very important? Yes, it's a key condition to be able to challenge the issues that we have, but it's not enough. We need also to go a little bit further than collaboration. We need to have a vision of the change that we want. We need to have a better, clear, and common understanding of the roots of the problem we are facing. And for that, of course, we need to be together, but we need to develop a strong leadership inside the civil society to be able to, maybe in the way that the church did before, to have a kind of common stream, common voice to be able to be in front, either the states or the market. I agree with Scott that we need to have a new normality, but I don't think we seized the opportunity of COVID and Black Lives Matter to really write the new normality that we need. I think we dreamed about the new normality in the month of March, April, June 2020. And when fall arrived, when we get out, we just jump out the dream and we start to wake up and work around reinventing the old normality. And that's a shame because we are not seizing the opportunity of the present crisis to be able really to have the sector collaborate more strongly between the different components of the community sectors, but also between different parts of Canada to be able to have a common voice toward the federal government, but also toward the big corporations that have a lot of power, economic and also political power. So I think that the present crisis is interesting, but it didn't bring all our capacity to develop a common vision and have a common theory of change. We need a proposal because the population won't follow. And if we want to do more than just be the doctor of the problem that the system is producing, then if we want to be the ideators of the new society that we need, then we will have to be more specific on the change and more politically engaged in the transformation, systemic transformation that is needed to be able to really engage in a new kind of society, in a new model of society. And I think that the transition, the social and ecological transition hypothesis and paradigm is interesting, but it brings us the platform to be able to develop such a vision and such a theory of change. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Aliya, Scott, and Jean-Marc for those inspiring stories that you shared about your work. Wow. Well, since we had our workshop on May 25th and 26th, our project team has been diving really deep into the notes taken by our incredible team of research assistants, reviewing the transcripts and watching the videos of the presentations, and closely looking at the information shared by speakers and members of the public who attended the sessions. We had such rich conversations that took place in 5 regions across Canada, and we're excited to soon be able to upload videos and summary notes of these regional conversations to the Community Campus Engage Canada website. We already have the videos of the national portions of the workshop uploaded, so please take a look at them if you didn't have a chance to attend or you only attended portions of them. Themes that came through really clear. Magda, I think you're the person who coined the phrase seizing the moment. Well, if not, I'm giving you credit for it anyways. It was clear that this theme for our year-long project resonated with a lot of people. As horrible as this past year has been, people who came together for our national and regional conversations recognize that we are at a critical juncture in history. We have a moment of opportunity to work together and literally to seize the moment. And what does this mean? I mean, I think Jean-Marc, you kind of touched on it. It means now is the time, like, to develop that vision, to develop strategies for collective impact to address the gaps in public and nonprofit infrastructure and services and programming that were there before, but have been exposed even more through the pandemic. Another theme that came through really loud and clear is that there's a tremendous desire from community leaders to share their stories of kind of on the ground mobilization and partnership development, and to learn from other creative efforts that took place these past 15 months to respond to this kind of unprecedented large scale crisis. Another message we heard is that there is no desire to move back to the status quo. Seizing the moment really equates with social justice and transformational change. Jean-Marc, you said it best. How do we develop effective collaborations and develop a vision of the change we want, and to have a common understanding of what the root causes of these problems are? You know, so how do we dismantle inequitable institutions and systems, and being mindful of institutions and processes that reproduce barriers and inequitable spaces? What I enjoyed the most in reviewing the material from the regional conversations was the stories of innovation and people coming together to address the crisis on the ground that made life for the most vulnerable citizens in our communities even worse than they were in the pre-pandemic era. There was excitement and pride in sharing stories of hope, and how people in cities, towns, or regions pulled together like never before to respond to the crisis and deliver services in new and creative ways. There are so many stories about how new structures and processes were created to enable quick decision-making and to navigate or circumvent unhelpful bureaucracy, is what we heard a lot of, which most people concluded would have been unlikely or difficult to implement during so-called normal times, but prove that structural and transformational change is possible. There was also key interest in documenting these success stories and learning from them and not going back to the old way of doing things. So a desire was, to share these stories and not let the lessons learned during this crisis be forgotten. But what we heard, and this is Scott, you touched on this quite a bit in your speech, community leaders expressed interest in working with universities in every region. At the center of almost every conversation, though, was the message that community is not prepared to waste their time working with people from the university unless engagement is reciprocal and co-creative in manner, and that community-based research must be consensual, relational, and collaborative. And it must involve voices not normally included in decision making. So people with lived experience of the issues we're trying to address, family members, frontline workers. Well, this means universities have to move beyond consultation to a place where all of the parties work together to craft the questions that are believed, to be worth investigating, and in the process, learning from each other's experience. Most importantly, not doing work, like you said, Scott, unless it's really clear that there's a reason for it. Like that, not doing research for research's sake. So anyway, so we're gonna now open this up for some discussion.
Yeah, and as we were saying, Lynn and I think, Lynn, you and I can sort of check all of the group among you to see if there are anyone who wants to ask a question. If I've missed anyone, please let me know and I'll look as well. Please, we welcome you to put in questions in the chat box, or if you have comments to share, you can do that as well. And I just, as I said, it's a bit of an informal space. So maybe we'll just take a moment to sort of check in with all of you about how you'd like to go ahead. If you have questions you'd like to ask of our presenters. I certainly had questions that I had for each of them, just listening to the incredible work that they've been doing, the research that they've been doing, and things they've been thinking about and their activities. And so we'll check that. So I think I see one coming in the chat box right now, actually. So here's a general question being asked by Neil in the group here. Neil states, my question isn't for anyone in particular, but was wondering, how does an organization retain or continue to collaborate with passionate and informed people when life, such as graduation or retirement, gets in the way? And so that's a good question to ask to our group. I'm wondering if people want to contribute comments in the chat, if anyone has a comment they'd like to add about that. There's another question that's come in from Rhonda, and it was actually a question I was going to ask to all three of our presenters. So I'm going to ask that now. And I'll invite Aliya, Jean-Marc, and Scott to address this if they'd like. And I'll just scroll back up here because my chat is moving quickly. So what are some of the challenges? What are some of the big challenges? I know that you've all spoken about challenges in your work and in your research, and I'm wondering if any of you would like to elaborate on that, on some of the biggest challenges you encounter in concepts and activities around collective action.
Yeah, well, that's for sure that the perpetuity of the collaboration or the collective action is an issue. It's not only retirement, it's also people that are moving from one job to the other. When you have a leader that was very important and he moved to another organization, and the replacement of that leader is very, very difficult. So we can see that the evolution of the collaboration, depending of the kind of moving of the people from one place to the other, have an impact on the collaboration capacity. So that's why it's not a kind of perpetual strong movement, but it goes maybe in waves, where then you can have a kind of momentum with different leaders that are able to really well work together. And then for some reason, some of them changed their way of thinking, or maybe move to another organization, or even retire. And then you have slowly a diminution of the capacity, the collective capacity of that group. So that's why you have you need to have a lot of different kind of initiatives to be able to keep a whole movement of collaboration around inside the sector.
I'm wondering if, Aliya, you have anything you'd like to add about elaborating on challenges in this work?
For sure. I think a lot of people here can probably empathize with work being turned upside down during the pandemic. I know with the youth climate movement, there's always an emphasis on strikes and protests, lots of in-person actions, and that was like the direction we have been taking for a few years now. And then I think I had like 3 days to switch an action from in-person to online, which is not the easiest thing to do. And so switching to online actions, I think has actually been really beneficial. You know, it allows me to speak to all of you guys, with people all across the country, which I wouldn't have necessarily engaged with before. I was more focused on like my local group. I have been able to work with young people and adults all across the country and push for national action and even on international campaigns. And so there are a lot of challenges with that, you know, like time zones, and putting together a video is a lot harder than you think it would be. But I think there's also like benefits that come out of them, like the people that you get to interact with. There's a wider diversity of people that you get to meet and so many more ideas. And yes, there sometimes is like that up and down flow of when we're making an impact and when we're not, but having a lot more people working together makes that a lot more stable.
It's great to hear. And Scott, did you want to add anything to that discussion as well?
Yeah, I might kind of roll two questions into one. I saw one from Robin in the chat there as well. One of the challenges that I run into quite a bit is around imperfect data. So an example of this would be, I've been doing some research on residential evictions in the city of Toronto, and there's not really any purpose-built data around who's getting evicted, where, why, and how. To kind of fill that gap, one thing that I did is starting to look at what data was available. And one of these data sets that was available was the Landlord and Tenant Board collects administrative data on their eviction hearings. So this data was never designed for research. It was basically a bookkeeping system for their eviction hearings. But using this data and connecting it with census data, we were able to do an analysis. So we looked at, okay, well, where are evictions applications being filed? What are the socio-demographics of people in those neighborhoods and census tracts, to try to kind of triangulate what we can know about evictions and who's being displaced. And through this, we found that census tracts with higher renter poverty have twice as high eviction filing rates as areas with lower renter poverty, which may not be surprising. But the big finding that stood out is even controlling for income, immigration status, age, gender, race really stood out, race and racism. So census tracts with more Black renter households in them had over 2.5 times higher eviction filing rates compared to neighborhoods with fewer Black residents in them. So I think that's kind of an example around engaging with imperfect data to create analyses. And there's also a question around incorporating qualitative information. So that paper I just talked about was a purely quantitative undertaking looking at data. So I think that only really tells us one part of the story and really incomplete picture. So following that up, doing interviews with service providers and community leaders in Toronto, in particular to try to understand why evictions are happening, how tenants react, what are successful strategies, and really try to get under the kind of the Black experience of evictions, discrimination and systemic racism that exists within them. That's helpful.
That's great, Scott. Thanks very much.
So maybe I can follow on that question. I found it very interesting because I tried to see what it means for me in perfect data, and another question arises: what is perfect data? And as a researcher, I doubt that I do work with perfect data. It's always imperfect. So data sometimes is more robust, sometimes it's more, the methodology is more rigorous, and sometimes it's very exploratory data. And so there's always imperfection or specificities of the data which we were working with. So I think we have to be maybe clear about the kind of data we are working with, but I don't think we could say that we need to have perfect data. That's a kind of utopia, for me, at least.
Great, thank you so much, Jean-Marc. And I see that we have other comments in the chat, and I think some of them are observations. And so I encourage you all to read those and perhaps become inspired by, other questions that you may have or comments you might want to share. I have another question I'd like to ask as well to Aliya, if you wouldn't mind. I am so interested and intrigued by the work that you're doing and the passion and the energy that you bring to it. And I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts to share additionally about what brings youth to this kind of collective advocacy work, what draws youth, and what you think are the unique qualities that youth bring to this kind of work. Oh, Aliya may not be able to hear. Well, I'll continue on with, I don't know, Lynn, if you have some questions for our group. I know I have several, but I'd be happy to share.
I I think the main thing that we're hoping to get from community and people participating is we want to hear from you as to what direction this Seize the Moment project should take, right? We want to make sure that this, at its very heart, is community driven, that this isn't just some intellectual exercise. We've had way too many of those conversations. We want to move this into the action area. So what actions do you think our national team can take to try to help mobilize and amplify the work that's already being done?
Yes, and we look forward to comments on that because just to emphasize again, this is a year-long project that involves many conversations. And so we're hoping to hear from all of you and all who have participated in this project about, you know, what CCEC perhaps could do, what, you know, our project as a whole can do, what, you know, our research team could do in terms of providing support or making those spaces for greater connection and conversation as well. And so, oh, I see someone has their hand up. Jane, would you like to share a comment or a question?
Yes, just in the context of what universities can do in working together with very small community nonprofit organizations. It was brought home to me rather heavily yesterday when I received the results of our attempt at a survey. So just quickly to say, it's a new normal for every organization, and small nonprofits are trying to figure out what is it that their own, you know, circle or their own community sees as priorities, or, you know, what do they feel able to manage? What, you know, what do they need to go forward? Which way should we go forward? And because the pandemic is still influencing us all, we're trying to figure out with surveys. And, you know, yesterday I was excited. I got 65 responses out of 90. I thought that's awesome, but I messed up how complicated the questions were. And so only 16 of those responses were complete. So there must be somebody out there that can help us do a better job of really basic, where do we go from here kind of surveys, because we can't sit down around a potluck or a coffee table anymore. And even in summer, it's very difficult to do that outside. I had one experience recently, but the wind, you know, makes it hard for people to hear. And in Saskatchewan, we have wind all the time. So, you know, just some ideas about how the university could help us to research what's the most important thing in our community right now, our little local community and our bigger city community and our provincial community. How do we get at that? Who else is looking? Thank you.
And this is a very important question you're asking, is the real productivity of the of university in the research domain. We are very strong with classical research, but we are very weak when we need to be more relational, more human in our way of doing research. And to be able to go in that direction, we need a new strategy from our university to give us the time and the resource to be able to work directly with the communities and to be able to develop a relation with them. Actually, we don't have a relation, it's more contractual, you know. You have a problem, you go and see university that try to do a research and that give the results of the research, and then you pass to another contract or another project and so on. So you're not working in a relational way with the community. sitting with them, following them, and being able to develop a strong long-term relation with the people that are engaged in the community, and also engaged in the fight that the community is doing. Because as Dewey said, around a problem, you need to have lots of people around the table to be able to solve the problem. And one of the people around the table is the researchers, and the others, they are the other sectors of the society. So to be part of the table is not to have a contractual relation that is very episodic. We need something that is more on the long term. And for that, we need to change the way that the research is taught at the university. It's very productive. You need to produce all the time, to publish all the time. Even if you produce the same article, the university don't mind. Just they want you to be able to present numbers. So the quality is not there. So I think your question is very important. Because it's a question that you are asking to university to be able to make the transformation in their own institution. And this is not an easy work to do, but I think we need to address that question.
We have a few moments left, but I noticed, I think Claire had a hand up. Claire, are you available? Would you like to go ahead?
I had it, and then I took it down, but maybe this is a sign from God. I have been sitting here thinking a lot exactly about this issue, that there's a lot of, to me, the issue isn't only the nature of our research, it's the whole nature of the university institution. I think listening to these conversations so much is about what community needs, but I do think the whole setup of the university institutionally, again, not just the nature of our research, but the nature of our research culture, performance review, what is and isn't valued, like that's the whole other side of this relationship that I think really needs to be addressed. And I guess I would say part of why I've come on this is looking for other people to collaborate on that issue. Like, what can we do significantly to transform the institution so that its linkages, the other side of this partnership, can work better? Because again, there are all sorts of barriers, and both rewards and punishments, as well as governance structures, legal issues, funding issues that all militate against this relationship. So I really was thinking, I didn't know how to do this, sending either Lynn an email but I guess I will present this publicly, that I think it would be great to have some people, and I would be interested in working with some people on institutional barriers to community engaged research. And I really would say again that it's not simply research barriers, that there are much larger issues in terms, again, of governance, of culture, etc.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. Thanks very much, Claire. I appreciate that. And that's actually a great segue into something I was just going to mention in the closing moments of this webinar. I'm going to be sending out, we're going to send out a post-webinar, a very brief in our email, an opportunity, a little survey that you could fill out. Basically, it was, I think, about 4 bits of information. If you're interested in connecting with others involved in this Seizing the Moment group. And so if you add that information for us in that email that we'll send to you, you can fill out that little survey, and we'll start collecting a little table of email addresses, contact info for individuals who are interested in connecting with each other and having these conversations. So thank you for raising that, Claire, because I think that's what we see as one of the great opportunities of this project, is that connecting. So I'm just going to pass along to Lynn for some closing comments. She's going to be talking about next steps in this project as well.
Remembering to unmute myself, of course. As Magda was mentioning, this is a year-long project. So we really are looking at this as just one more step in that process. And thank you, Claire, for that suggestion. That's exactly what the whole purpose of this project is to bring people together to work on these issues together. So you will be seeing notices come from CCEC if you're on that email list about kind of upcoming future webinars, and please kind of look to continual updates for the website that's going to be happening. We've got a really excellent team of research assistants that are trying to collect those stories. And one of the big goals over the next few months is to try to bring those people together to share that information with each other. So just be on the lookout for more stuff to come from us, but more importantly, be in touch and let us, Community Campus Engage Canada, let us kind of help you in making those connections so that we collectively can work together on all of this.
So great, thanks, Lynn. And on behalf of Lynn and myself, we want to say thank you very much again to our presenters today, to Aliya, to Scott, to Jean-Marc. I certainly personally learned a lot, and it was great to hear about your experiences and your thoughts related to this theme. And so we'll just, as I see that the hour has come up, so I'll just say once again, please do check in with us at info@ccecanada.ca if you have any questions. I'll be sending out a post-webinar email with some more information, and we'll go from there. But thanks to all of you, and I hope you all have a great day.